Imagine a world where video games didn't exist in your living room. If you wanted to experience the newest game on Earth, you had to leave your house and go find it. For nearly 30 years, the arcade was the center of gaming culture. It was where new technology debuted, where friendships were formed, and rivalries were born. Where countless children's allowances disappeared one quarter at a time. Before esports, streaming on Twitch and YouTube, and online leaderboards, there were high-score lists to get respect at the arcade. Rows of glowing machines lined the walls of shopping malls, pizza restaurants, movie theaters, bowling alleys, and dedicated video game arcades. Players gathered around cabinets to watch the best competitors, cheer on friends, and learn strategies from local champions. At its peak, the arcade industry generated billions of dollars and became one of the most successful forms of entertainment in the world. But then something changed. The crowds began to shrink, the quarters stopped flowing, and the machines disappeared. By the early 2000s, many of the arcades that had defined a generation were gone. So why did the arcade rise so fast in the 70s and 80s, only to fall so hard by the 2000s? Well, this is the story of the rise and fall of the video game arcade. Before there were video game arcades, there were coin-operated amusements. For decades, Americans had spent their spare change on pinball machines, mechanical shooting galleries, fortune tellers, strength testers, and a variety of other amusement devices. These machines could be found nearly everywhere. Bars, restaurants, bowling alleys, carnivals. Arcades themselves weren't really a new idea. What was new was the concept of using a television screen as the attraction. And that idea would change entertainment forever. The story begins in 1971. A young engineer named Nolan Bushnell had become fascinated by a computer game called Space War. Originally developed on expensive university computers, Space War allowed players to battle each other using spaceships on a screen. Bushnell wondered if something similar could be turned into a coin-operated machine. Working alongside Ted Dabney, he created what would become the world's first commercial arcade video game. Its name was Computer Space. To modernize, Computer Space looks incredible. The cabinet featured a futuristic fiberglass shell that looked like it had fallen straight out of a science fiction movie like Star Trek. Players controlled a rocket ship and battled computer-controlled flying saucers. For 1971, it was revolutionary. But there was just one problem. Most people had absolutely no idea how to play the game. Today, we take video game controls for granted, but in 1971, many customers never touched anything computerized before, let alone control it. Computer Space was simply too complicated for the average person. Although it sold reasonably well, it wasn't the massive success that Bushnell had hoped for. Still, it proved people would pay money to play games. The concept worked, so now they just needed to find the right game. In 1972, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney founded a company that would later become one of the most important names in gaming history, Atari. Their goal was simple: create video games that anyone could understand immediately. To help accomplish this goal, Bushnell assigned a young engineer named Al Alcorn a training exercise. The project was simple: create an electronic version of table tennis. Nobody at Atari at the time could have imagined the impact that this small assignment would have on video game history. And that's because the game that Al Alcorn created was called Pong. Its concept couldn't have been more simple. 2 paddles, 1 ball. The first player to score 11 points wins. That simplicity became its greatest strength. Unlike Computer Space, Pong required almost no explanation. Players immediately understood what they needed to do. Move the paddle, hit the ball, and score some points. Atari installed a prototype Pong machine in a California bar called Handicap's Tavern. A few days later, the owner called Atari and reported that the machine had stopped working. Alcorn rushed to investigate what the hell was going on, and when he opened the cabinet, he discovered the problem. The coin box was overflowing. There were too many quarters inside that the machine literally could not accept any more quarters, and had jammed itself. Pong was an instant hit, so Atari couldn't build machines fast enough. Arcades wanted them, bars wanted them, bowling alleys wanted them, restaurants wanted them, everybody wanted Pong. For the first time, video games had become a legitimate business. But success inevitably attracts competition. Within months, countless companies began releasing their own versions of Pong. Some were legal, some were not. The market quickly became flooded with nearly identical games. Everywhere players looked, there seemed to be another electronic table tennis machine. Yet, despite the growing competition, something important was happening. Video games were becoming accepted. The public was no longer viewing them as strange experiments, they were becoming part of everyday entertainment. And the technology was improving rapidly. Throughout the mid-1970s, manufacturers experimented with new ideas. Games became more colorful, complex, and exciting. Companies like Atari, Midway, Sega, and others began exploring genres beyond Pong games, such as racing games, tank battles, and shooting games. The foundation of the arcade industry was being built. At the same time, shopping malls were expanding across America. New entertainment spaces were opening, and a generation of young people were eager for something new. By 1977, all the pieces were in place. The technology, market, and most importantly, paying customers were ready. What the industry needed now was a killer app, a game so influential that it would transform arcades from a growing business into a worldwide phenomenon. That game would arrive from Japan in 1978. Its name was Space Invaders, and it would launch what many consider as the golden age of the arcade. Created by designer Tomohiro Nishikado, Space Invaders was unlike anything most players had ever seen. Instead of a game of paddles and balls like Pong, players controlled a laser cannon defending Earth from an army of descending alien invaders. The concept was simple: destroy the aliens before they destroy you. But what made Space Invaders special, it was its tension. The aliens moved slowly at first and faster and faster and faster, all the while the soundtrack was playing faster and faster and faster, making it more intense for the player. And then as the last invader remained, the game became a frantic battle for survival. Players couldn't get enough of it. Across Japan, arcades filled with customers eager to challenge the invading alien army. Soon the phenomenon spread across the world. For the first time, video games weren't simply a novelty, they were becoming a cultural event. The age of the arcade had truly begun. Space Invaders ignited a firestorm. Arcade operators rushed to install machines. New arcade locations opened everywhere. Shopping malls, movie theaters, convenience stores, bowling alleys, restaurants, even gas stations. Anywhere there was enough room for an arcade cabinet, someone was trying to put them there. By the end of the decade, arcades had transformed from a niche business into one of the fastest growing forms of entertainment in the world. And the hits, they just kept coming. In 1979, Atari answered Space Invaders with a game of its own, Asteroids. Conceived by Lyle Raines and designed by Ed Logg, Asteroids placed players in control of a small spaceship trapped in a field of deadly space rocks. Unlike Space Invaders, the playfield wrapped around a screen. Objects leaving one side would reappear on the other. Combined with the inertia-based controls, the game demanded skill and precision. Players loved it. Asteroids quickly became Atari's biggest arcade success. The arcade boom was accelerating, but the biggest icons were still to come. In 1980, a yellow circle changed gaming forever. Pac-Man had arrived. Created by Toru Iwatani and released by Namco, Pac-Man nearly broke every rule of arcade design. There were no spaceships, tanks, aliens, guns, anything like that. Instead, players navigated a maze while being chased by 4 colorful ghosts. The game appealed to everyone: men, women, children, adults, old folks. Pac-Man quickly became more than just a video game. It became a global phenomenon. There were cartoons and t-shirts, board games, lunchboxes, records, breakfast cereals, you name it. For a brief moment in the early 1980s, Pac-Man was everywhere. And the arcade had officially entered the mainstream culture. Then in 1981, a Japanese company called Nintendo desperately needed an arcade hit. A young designer named Shigeru Miyamoto was assigned the project. The game was originally designed to be Popeye, with Bluto, Olive Oil, and Popeye as the characters, but the licensing deal fell through. So Nintendo designed their own characters, and the result was Donkey Kong. The players controlled a carpenter named Jumpman as he climbed construction girders to rescue a kidnapped woman named Pauline from the giant ape, Donkey Kong. Today, we know the Jumpman character by another name, Mario. Donkey Kong introduced storytelling and character-driven gameplay to millions of players. It also introduced the world to the character who eventually became gaming's most recognizable mascot. Nintendo had arrived, and gaming would never be the same. By 1982, arcades were everywhere, and for millions of kids, it became a second home. Friday nights meant meeting with friends at the arcade, birthday parties happened there, weekends started at the arcade and often ended there. Every local arcade had its legends, the kid who could beat everyone at Defender, the Pac-Man master who seemed impossible to defeat, and the player who somehow made one quarter last for hours. High scores, bragging rights, and reputations mattered. Long before online leaderboards, local arcade champions were gaming celebrities in their communities. For many players, the first arcades weren't dedicated arcades at all. It was the pizza restaurants. Throughout the late 70s and early 80s, Pizza Hut locations across America began installing arcade cabinets. Parents came for dinner and kids came for the games. A simple family outing could easily turn into an afternoon spent playing Pac-Man or Galaga. But no restaurant embraced the arcade culture quite like ShowBiz Pizza Place. Founded in 1980, ShowBiz Pizza combined pizza, arcade games, and animatronic entertainment into one unforgettable experience. For kids growing up in the arcade boom, ShowBiz felt magical. The restaurant featured large game rooms filled with the latest arcade machines. Players could spend hours moving from cabinet to cabinet while waiting for the next performance from the famous Rock-afire Explosion animatronic band. For many children, ShowBiz Pizza was their first real arcade experience. It wasn't unusual for birthday parties to revolve around pizza, tokens, and trying to beat your friends' high scores. In many ways, ShowBiz Pizza became a gateway into gaming culture for an entire generation. By 1982, the arcade industry appeared unstoppable. New games were arriving almost every month. The arcades were packed, manufacturers were making money, and so were the operators. Players couldn't get enough. From the outside, everything looked great and perfect inside the industry. But underneath the surface, serious problems were beginning to emerge. The arcade business had become a victim of its own success. Every company wanted a hit. Every operator wanted more machines, and every investor wanted a piece of the booming industry. And suddenly, there were simply too many games. Whenever a game became successful, competitors rushed to create their own version. Space Invaders inspired dozens of alien shooter clones. Pac-Man inspired countless maze games. Donkey Kong inspired wave after wave of platformers. Many were good, and a lot of them just weren't. Operators who once carefully selected cabinets now found themselves overwhelmed with choices. Not every machine could be a hit. For every Pac-Man, there were dozens of forgettable titles that barely earned enough money to justify the floor space they occupied. Soon, some arcade owners discovered a troubling reality. The newest machine wasn't automatically making money anymore. And the games weren't the only thing multiplying. Arcades themselves were appearing everywhere. The competition intensified. Instead of one arcade serving a neighborhood, there might be several now. The same customers were being spread across more locations. And revenue per machine began to decline. Many operators who had expanded aggressively during the boom suddenly found themselves struggling. At the same time, another challenge was emerging. For the first time, players could bring arcade-style experiences into their homes. The Atari 2600, along with several other consoles, had become a massive success. While arcade-style games looked and played better, kids no longer had to leave the house to enjoy games. They could play whenever they wanted, and no quarters were required. For arcade operators, this was an unsettling development. The arcade had superior technology, but for the first time, it had real competition, and it was about to get a whole lot worse. When people hear the phrase video game crash of '83, they usually think about the home console market. And it's true, the home console industry was devastated in North America. Manufacturers collapsed, retailers lost confidence, and millions of dollars just vanished overnight. But the video game crash also sent shockwaves to the arcade industry. Investors became cautious, manufacturers scaled back production, and operators became reluctant to purchase expensive new machines. The industry entered a period of uncertainty. Some arcades closed, others downsized. Many wondered if the boom years had already ended. By 1984, it was clear that the first great arcade boom was over. The incredible growth of the late 70s and early 80s had slowed dramatically. For observers, it seemed as though arcade gaming had reached its peak and would never recover. Just when many people thought arcades were fading away, Sega reminded the world why arcades existed in the first place. To deliver experiences impossible to recreate at home. In 1985, Sega released a game that looked unlike anything players had ever seen. Hang On. Instead of sitting in front of a standard cabinet, players climbed onto a life-size motorcycle. To steer, they physically leaned left and right. The machine transformed gaming into a physical experience. Crowds gathered around to watch every cabinet. Kids watched in amazement and parents wanted to try too. It was a massive success, and Sega was only getting started. Throughout the late 1980s, Sega launched a series of spectacular arcade games. Outrun, Space Harrier,
You're doing great!
Afterburner, Super Monaco GP, home consoles couldn't compete, not even close. For many players, stepping into one of these machines felt like entering the future, and arcades began filling up once again. While American arcades struggled throughout the mid-1980s, Japanese game centers continued to evolve. Companies like Sega, Namco, Konami, Capcom, and Taito invested heavily in arcade development. Competition drove innovation. Hardware became more powerful, graphics improved dramatically, new genres emerged, and the arcade was no longer simply surviving, it was evolving. And then one game arrived that would completely transform arcade culture. In 1991, Capcom released Street Fighter II, and everything changed. Before Street Fighter II, fighting games existed, but after Street Fighter II, they dominated. Players selected unique characters from around the world and battled head-to-head. Every fighter had different moves, different strengths, and different weaknesses. The depth of the game seemed endless. Arcades suddenly weren't just about chasing high scores. They were about competition. Direct competition. Player versus player. Winner stays, loser inserts another quarter. For many players, this became an obsession. Entire crowds would gather around a single cabinet, watching, learning, and waiting for another chance. Street Fighter II created a social experience that home gaming couldn't replicate, and it launched one of the biggest arcade booms in history. If Street Fighter II reignited the arcade industry, Mortal Kombat poured gasoline straight on the fire and made it explode. Released in 1992, Mortal Kombat shocked players with digitized actors, brutal combat, and controversial finishing moves known as fatalities. Kids talked about how brutal it was at school while parents worried about it. Politicians debated it, everybody wanted to see it, and everybody wanted to play it. Controversy became its marketing, and arcades benefited enormously, and the fighting game war had just begun. Throughout the 1990s, arcades experienced what many players remember as their final golden age. Games like Virtual Fighter, Tekken, Killer Instinct, Daytona USA, Time Crisis, Cruisin' USA, and Virtual Cop. The arcade once again became the center of gaming innovation. For nearly 25 years, arcades had one unbeatable advantage, and that was technology. No matter how powerful your home console was, the arcade machine was always better. Better graphics, better sound, more memory, processing power. If you wanted to see the future of gaming, you went to the arcade. But by the mid-1990s, something unexpected happened. Home consoles started catching up. And for the first time in arcade history, players began staying at home instead of going to the arcade. In 1995, Sony entered the gaming industry with the PlayStation and Sega with the Saturn. They weren't the first 3D consoles, but they were the first to truly bring arcade 3D gaming to millions of homes. Games like Ridge Racer, Tekken, Virtua Fighter, and Daytona USA looked remarkably similar to their arcade counterparts. The gap was shrinking, and consumers noticed. For years, arcade operators had relied on having experiences you could get nowhere else, but then those experiences came to your living room. Then came the Dreamcast. Released in 1998 in Japan and 1999 in North America, the Dreamcast was practically an arcade machine disguised as a home console. Many arcade games required very little modification before appearing on the system. For arcade fans, it was a dream come true. For arcade owners, it was a warning sign. Players no longer had to drive across town to experience cutting-edge gaming. The experience was waiting for them at home. And then came the PS2, and everything changed. The PlayStation 2 became the most successful video game console of all time. Its massive library and graphics were very impressive, and many arcade experiences now arrived on consoles within months of their arcade debut. The cycle that once kept arcades ahead was disappearing. For decades, arcades offered something that couldn't be replicated at home: social interaction. You met people, you challenged them, you built local reputations. The arcade was gaming's social network before social networks existed. Then the internet arrived. LAN parties became popular and online multiplayer expanded. Gamers could now compete against friends whenever they wanted without leaving their house. The social advantage that helped sustain arcades for decades was slowly disappearing. Another factor was changing retail habits. Throughout the 1980s and early 90s, shopping malls had been the perfect environment for arcades. Foot traffic was constant, teenagers gathered there naturally, and families spent entire afternoons browsing stores and visiting food courts. But by the late 1990s and early 2000s, many malls began struggling. Retail patterns changed, online shopping emerged, and consumer habits evolved. As mall traffic declined, many arcades lost the locations that had once fueled their success. Some attempted to adapt, others disappeared entirely. Now, the arcade industry didn't surrender without a fight. Manufacturers doubled down on experiences that still couldn't easily be recreated at home. Dance Dance Revolution, Time Crisis, House of the Dead, Initial D, large-scale racing simulators, and massive multiplayer cabinets. The strategy made sense. If consoles could match traditional arcade games, then arcade games needed to offer something bigger, something physical and unique. In some locations, it worked. But the golden days were gone. By the mid-2000s, many people believed arcades were just finished. The familiar game rooms that had defined childhoods throughout the 80s and 90s had largely disappeared. The cabinets were sold, the lights went dark, and quarters stopped flowing. At least that's how it seemed. But arcades could truly never die. They evolved. Across the country, enthusiasts began preserving gaming history. Collectors rescued machines from warehouses, operators saved cabinets destined for scrapyards, and restoration experts repaired aging monitors, joysticks, and circuit boards. What seemed destined to disappear was being preserved by passionate fans. Entire collections were being built around keeping arcade history alive. For many people, these machines were more than just games. They were memories, their childhoods. As a new generation also discovered the appeal of arcade gaming, a new thing called barcades started appearing across the country, arcades with bars in them. Many locations charge a flat admission fee. Then players could enjoy classic games all day. What was once old became new again, and younger generations finally had an opportunity to experience arcade culture for the first time for themselves. For those of us who lived through it, the arcade was more than just a place. It was an experience. It was the sound of the quarters rattling in your pocket, the glow of the CRT screen in the dark room, the excitement of seeing a brand new machine for the first time, and the frustration of losing your last life, the thrill of setting the new high score, and the anticipation of waiting your turn with the quarter lined up on the cabinet. For an entire generation, arcades is where gaming culture was born. And while the arcades may be gone, their influence still lives on today in every console, every multiplayer session, and every game that we play today. Arcades may have fallen, but their legacy never will. And that brings us to the end of today's video. If you guys dug the content, don't forget to hit that like, that subscribe, that notification bell, and that hype. Also, if you want to help support the channel, consider becoming a member or leaving a super down below. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have a great one. Peace out, y'all.